my name is Kyle Scatina, and I have one question for you to start off. How many of you guys have kids? You guys raise your hands. 5 of you, so half of you. How many of you guys have nephews or nieces that are younger? So the rest of you. Awesome. Alright, well, let's say that your child or your niece or nephew is in 3rd grade, and they have to walk a mile plus to school. And on top of that, they have to go through a railroad switchyard, which for those of you that don't know, that is a railroad switchyard where all the trains go and it's real dangerous. So, what if they had to go to that school, and on top of that, there was another school that was only 7 blocks away, but they weren't allowed to go to that because of their race? Well, Oliver Brown had a problem with his 7-year-old daughter, Linda, going to her all-black school, and that created the Brown versus the Board of Education, which many people know about it, but I want to make sure that you guys know why and how and the specifics and the significance of it. So, early in the 1950s, racial segregation in the public school was normal across America. We had black schools and we had white schools. Now we don't really think of it as much because we have just one big collective population in one school. One of the most historical court cases, especially when talking about education, is the Brown versus the Board of Education. This case dealt with segregation within the school system in terms of white and black students within public schools. Up until this case, all the states had laws establishing separate schools. And the Brown versus the Board was a landmark that made these laws unconstitutional. When I was reading an article done by a man named Alex McBride, who was at Harvard, he studied law, he told everyone about the plaintiffs and the defense. And I found it real interesting that the plaintiffs for the Brown included Oliver Brown as well as 60% of the rest of the parents to that school. And the school district was the Topeka School District, and all these parents had the exact same concerns as Oliver Brown did. And the fact that they wanted to enroll their kids in the white school, which is closer, but again, they weren't allowed. So they talked to the school district, and the school district was told that both schools were equal. Transportation, the buildings, the curriculum, the teaching was all the same. So they had to enroll in their segregated schools. When they were denied access to the closer school, they took their argument in June of 1951 to the District Court of Kansas, creating the ever-changing Brown versus the Board case. The NAACP, which is the National Association of the Advancement of Colored People, argued that segregation schools sent a message to black children that they were inferior to white. However, the board's argument pointed out that there were many successful black people that had overcome the segregated schools. So, since the case of the Plessy versus the Ferguson had not been overturned, the court felt compelled to rule in favor of the Board of Education. Now, for you guys that don't know what the Plessy versus the Ferguson case is, it just says that everyone's separate but equal involving public facilities. So let me take you guys on a little timeline of what happened so you guys can look at it. On October 1951, just 4 months after they were denied by the district court, they appealed to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court heard their case along with 3 other cases that challenged school segregation: South Carolina, Virginia, and Delaware. And after a year of waiting, the Supreme Court finally heard their case but didn't reach a decision. So, after yet another year of waiting, so now the date is December of 1953, where they had the re-argument. The court suggested that both sides should discuss the circumstances surrounding the 14th Amendment. So, for all you history buffs, who knows what the 14th Amendment is? Does anybody know the 14th Amendment? Give you a hint, it is the Reconstruction Amendment. Anybody? No? Cool. Well, I'll tell you. It simply says that everyone was born in the United States and should get full and equal benefit of the law. So the question was whether or not desegregated schools deprive black children of equal protection of the law. So, finally, a unanimous decision was made in 1954 after discussing about this for roughly like a half of a year. On the website streetlaw.org, which had every case that the Supreme Court has ever come across, I found a quote by the Chief Justice Earl Whitman, who said, we conclude that the doctrine separate but equal has no place. So, the separate educational facilities are obviously unequal, and they did deprive of the equal protection under the 14th Amendment. So, when all was said and done, court ruled in favor of Brown and required the desegregation of schools across America. This case wasn't normal, obviously, because it has a lot to deal with. So, this was a major turning point. There were fights that broke out. People lost their lives for standing up for what they believed in. And now that with the mixed society, it's just chaos and whatnot. So, everything changed after that. And there's one example that I found on the NAACP website that's very memorable, that everyone knows about, and happened 1 year after. That was the Rosa Parks incident. And when she refused to move to the back of the bus in order for the white guy to sit there. So now we're talking about this. Now everyone should get a better understanding, maybe know the 14th Amendment at least. And you'll be able to tell why the case was brought up, how it was dealt with, and to be able to explain the significance of it. And I think that it's absolutely crazy that just one family, along with other families that all talked about it, is stuck together, and that changed the course of history, which is pretty freaking cool. So, Brown versus the Board of Education was a big milestone for everyone. The Supreme Court case said that the laws were unconstitutional, and the court demanded that all states had to integrate their schools as soon as possible. I know there's a lot of information and whatever, so you might not be familiar with it. Does anybody have any questions? Anybody at all? Yes, sir.
Question for you. Do you think we're probably at another area in history? I mean, they decide, let's desegregate the schools, mix everyone in together. But right now, about 40% of blacks are dropping out of school and not finishing high school. So do you think we should be at a point to say, hey, this didn't work? And part of it, why maybe a lot of blacks are not finishing school, because now you have a voucher system that's come into play. And don't get me wrong, I'm a card-carrying Republican. But the schools that are suffering are these inner-city schools, mostly minority students, whether it be black or Hispanic. So do you think we should say at this point, let's get another suit together to help? Because it wasn't just because Brown's children had to walk so far to get to school, but we wanted an equal opportunity in education and the whole bit. And of course, it also leads to, jail time, recidivism, and the whole bit. But do you think, it's not a question, just do you think we're at that point that we should do something about that?
I think that eventually it will come up again, and there will be another suit, because, this happened, 60 years ago, 50 years ago, so times have changed, and they've changed fast. So I can definitely see that happening real soon. Anybody else? All right. Well, so yeah, separate but equal was no longer an option, and no longer would there be white schools and black schools, but one school system for both together.